Hello, everybody, and welcome to the wild, wacky, weird, but wonderful world of the Word. Yep, when we talk about those interesting little things that come up concerning the Bible and, things you don't often talk about or hear about, but hey, they're there. And what brought up this episode for me was in our lessons coming up for this Sunday, the third Sunday of Easter, we have mentioned a couple times of Jesus explaining the scriptures, or the writer of First John, the letter of First John, making reference to the scriptures and how they talk about Jesus and his resurrection and his life, all that sort of thing. Okay, but the question is, what did they mean by scriptures? They are talking about the Hebrew scriptures, the Older Testament for us. Now, here's the question. What about the New Testament? We consider that scripture. When in our history did what we have in the New Testament become scripture? Did you ever think about that? It just didn't happen overnight. I mean, it was a process. It took time, and it took meetings amongst early Christian leaders to determine, yeah, this is in, this is out. It's all part of a process. It's called canonization. You know, like cannon, bang, the gun? Well, that's also a Greek word that means rule, okay, or measure. So, how do you measure what is really authentic stuff that was inspired by God to be written down, and how do you not do that? Well, it's not always an easy process. I owe a lot of what I read on a blog this week to what I'm about to say. The individual's name is Stephen Hunter. He's a pastor in Kentucky, but also he's someone who's very steeped in history and does a lot of study and publication on these issues. And so it's interesting to find out that for us, we have 27 books that we have considered authoritative canon in the New Testament. 27. So it's 4 Gospels, Paul's letters, a couple other letters, and then the book of Revelation. And where do we get that from? Who decided that? One of the earliest writings that we have goes back to the year 367, and it was what's called a festal letter of Athanasius. Athanasius was a bishop of churches in the Egyptian area, okay? And shortly after Epiphany, he would write a letter to the different churches under his rule, and he would say, okay, this is the date of Easter this year, so this is when Lent's going to start, and blah, blah, blah. Then he also would throw in a few other things that were important. And one of the things from this year, in this 39th letter, that he felt was important was to firmly establish in the church's minds what books of the New Testament we're going to consider authoritative. So he listed the 27 that we now have. But what's interesting is part of his letter was also making it clear that there's a couple of books that we're not going to accept, folks. So stop reading these ones in church. 2 of those were the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas. He said, no, we're not even going to look there anymore. Now, he also did have a little thing there. He went to bat for the letters of 1st and 2nd Peter, and also the book of Revelation, because there were still those within the Christian community that felt, they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be there. Okay, so you got that? That's the year 367. That's the 4th century. The 4th century. Now, a little earlier than that, we'd already had reference that a canon had been emerging among different groups within the Christian ranks, especially around the Mediterranean area. And in North Africa, there was a list of 24 books that was called the Mommsen Catalog, that was just a few years earlier than this bishop Athanasius festal letter. So that was at 359. Now, another early church father, Cyril of Jerusalem, had listed in 350 all the books of the New Testament that we have except for Revelation. But if we go back just a little bit earlier in that, at 325, in the year 325, the Council of Nicaea had met, and they talked about a couple different things, and one of them was, what books do we accept in the canon? And they pretty much talked about what we have, although their main emphasis for that meeting was the divinity of Jesus. There were those who questioned Jesus' divinity within the Christian ranks. And so that was something that had to be settled. And what did we really come out from what came out of that conference? The Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed. That's in a lot of our hymn books. Yeah, it's really long. Longer than the Apostles' Creed. Then there's the Nicene. If you really want the longest creed, that's the Athanasian Creed. All right, that's even longer yet. But anyhow, there was talk then about what is legit within our New Testament. So you see, things have been going on for a while, but you can even go back to the year 250. This is interesting too. There's another early church father, early church theologian. His name was Origen, and he produced his own list of books. And the ones he listed were Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. He talked about the epistles of Peter, James, and Jude. He also talked about the Acts of the Apostle, talked about 14 of Paul's epistles, and it also included Revelation as being one of John's letters, all right? But so that goes back to the year 250. See, now we keep pushing further and further back, closer to the time of Jesus. But here's the clincher. Why did we need to do this? Why did we have to set authoritative scripture, a canon, a rule of what we're going to accept? Well, we can blame it all on in 144 of the Common Era, 144 AD. It's listed both ways, okay? There was an early church heretic. His name was Marcion. Marcion, all he accepted as authoritative for scripture from the New Testament was the Gospel of Luke and 10 of Paul's letters. He didn't want Hebrews. He threw out the pastoral epistles. But Marcion, he had some issues with a lot of other church leaders, and he was considered a heretic. And that's something, I think we need to get into at another time. It's a little complicated and a little bit long. So, but just to know that he had his own canon of scripture, and we have a listing of that goes back to that year, 144. We also have in 170 a work that came out that's called A Harmony of the Four Gospels. Yeah, Harmony of the Four Gospels. Tatian had written this, and he took Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and tried to combine them into one. It's really tough to do that. You really can't. Each one is unique, and you need to read it on its own merits. There's a lot of other things that go on there too, but just know this. Early on, even internally in some of the letters that we have in the Newer Testament, there's reference to Paul. There's reference to some of the Gospels that actually quotes from, for instance, Luke. And these are writings that are around the 100 year, 90 to 100 Common Era, okay? So already there are some of those early authors quoting from each other. It's kind of a cool thing to see. So they are circulating, and there's also other non-biblical writings that talk about how the early Christians met and how they would sing and then they did this and they did that. And one of the things they would do was read the um, memorials of the apostles, which is probably a reference to some of the gospels, all right? And um, generally just it's not just the Hebrew scriptures that they were reading as authoritative on the same level of that as Hebrew scripture. They're also reading letters of the apostles. So it's an interesting development, very interesting development. And the thing we need to realize is it didn't just end right there where so many people say, hey, um, that year what was it, 367 with the letter, the festal letter of Athanasius. That's it. No, that isn't it right there. It was not settled even then. We can go all the way to the time of the Reformation. There, even Martin Luther was having to dispute over some of the things that were read in the Bible and considered scripture. One of them, the book of James, he thought that was absolutely worthless. He still studied it, he still read from it, but he didn't like it. He didn't like it at all. And there were books that the Protestant reformers cut out of the scriptures that the Catholic Church still adheres to this day. So it's far from being over, but just know that as a whole, the Christian church accepts 27 books of the Newer Testament that we now use. So, wild, weird, wacky, yes. It was an interesting ride to get to where we are today. And even then, there's still many, many disputes over who exactly are the authors of some of those works. But what really matters is not so much who the authors were, but what did they have to say to you and to me for our Christian living today. That's where we really have to get serious. God's blessings be with you, and hope to see you next week on the wild, weird, wacky, but wonderful world of the Word. Have a great day.